Hello, everybody, and welcome to our third presentation in our orientation series for outbound exchange students for the Rotary year 2021. Our presentation this evening is on the rules, and I have two exchange students, former exchange students, joining me. So ladies, if you want to unmute yourselves now, we can chat. I have with me both Abby McFarlane and Maddie Caparini. Ladies, if you'd like to introduce yourself just a little bit, tell us who your sponsor club was, where you went, and what you're doing now. Maddie.
Hi, my name is Abby McFarlane. I went to Italy. My sponsor club was Okotoks. And right now I'm going back to high school. I have to do this year and I'll graduate, but I'll go back again next year for upgrading.
Okay, Maddie.
Hi, my name is Maddie. I went to Třebíč, which is in the Czech Republic. My sponsor club was a joint sponsor between Medicine Hat Rotary and Stamus Rotary, which are both located in Medicine Hat. Right now I'm finishing up my last year of high school, and then I'm going to go to college.
Great, girls. Thanks for coming and helping us out today. So this presentation is on the rules, and every year on exchange, there are a number of exchanges that end early. Sometimes it's voluntary, so the students decide that they've, for one reason or another, want to terminate their exchanges. And some exchanges are terminated because students get home for breaking various rules. So today's presentation is going to talk about how it is you can get yourself sent home from exchange. I think the first thing that you should know about that process is the only way you can actually get sent home from exchange is if the two district chairs agree that that's what should happen. So our district chair here in 5360 would be contacted by the district chair wherever you go, and those two persons would have to agree to terminate the exchange. Other than that, there would be a process of negotiation, and they would decide on what kind of punishment would be acceptable for whatever it is you happen to have done. So I guess my first question to you girls is, Maddie, were you aware of anybody that got sent home or went home from exchange early?
Yes, so my district was pretty huge. We had 94 kids, so we definitely had a couple people who went home early, and it was pretty heartbreaking, actually, saying goodbye to them.
Okay, and do you know where, did they go home voluntarily or were they sent home?
We had a couple sent home. So
okay.
We had one girl from Brazil, and she was sent home right from the beginning because she was very disrespectful to her host family, and it came to the point where no one would take her anymore. Like, none of her backup host families wanted to be around her. So they couldn't find any host families for her, and as a result, she got sent home. And then we had one girl sent home who was caught drinking out at night and doing marijuana, which was obviously not the best, and she got sent home. And we had another girl who got sent home who was a very good friend of mine, who was sent home for not trying to learn the language.
Okay. Abby.
I know one girl that went home, but she wasn't with Rotary. She was with a program called AFS, and she wasn't sent home. She just wanted to go home.
Okay. So I'm going to attempt to share my screen now. It's got a PowerPoint presentation on it. So we're going to try and see if we can make that work. All right, so hopefully you can see the screen. It's our PowerPoint presentation now. And I think that what we're going to talk about first here is what are called the Rotary Ds. Oh, I went one too far. I don't know if I can back up one or not here. Okay, anyway, we'll get there in a minute. The Rotary Ds are probably the first thing that you learn about when you start Googling Exchange or learning anything about Exchange. Girls, I'm sure you agree that they're probably the first thing you heard about.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes, it's not uncommon for our students to have learned that first. So the four Rotary Ds are, first of all, no drinking. And the no drinking rules are, well, I should say all of the rules, all of the four Rotary Ds are really designed to keep you safe. The idea is that you're in a place where you don't necessarily know the language and you're not familiar with the culture. You're certainly not familiar with the lay of the land. And the idea is that these rules are supposed to help keep you safe. So the first among those is no drinking. Now, the no drinking rule it varies a little bit from district to district and country to country, depending on where you go. So you'll see on our screen that sometimes you will hear that the no drinking is referred to as no unauthorized drinking or no drinking that leads to loss of control. Again, depending a little bit on where you're going in the world and what the culture there is. So the important part about that to remember is, well, two parts actually. The first part being that the default for the no drinking rule is that there is no drinking of alcohol allowed at all. And if you take that as the default position, you can never go wrong. However, there are some places and some cultures where the drinking of alcohol by exchange students is permitted. And you probably will learn a little bit more about that at the orientation that you attend once you're in your host district. So when you first go to your host district, each host district is obligated to have an orientation session for exchange students. And that session will go through all of the nuances that are involved in the rules. So ladies, each of you had an orientation when you first arrived in country. Abby?
Yeah.
Okay, can you tell us a little bit about where it was and when and what happened there?
Mine was in a place called Jesolo, really close to Venice. And all the exchange students from my multi-district went there, and it was 3 days there, but only 1 day of like presentations and stuff like that. And the rule was just no drinking at all, kind of the same as our district here.
Okay, so your orientation said that you shouldn't be doing any drinking at all.
Yeah.
Okay, Maddie, what was your orientation like?
My first orientation was in a place called Krzyżanów, which is kind of Eastern Czech Republic. It's a pretty beautiful town, so we just toured around it. We had a lot of presentations. And the rule for our exchange district was that you could drink with your host family or with your Rotary club. So like personally, my Rotary club served champagne whenever someone had a birthday, and a lot of people had birthdays, so they often had champagne. And then my friends' Rotary club like gave them wine every night. So it really just depended.
Okay, but you learned those things at your orientations. One of the questions I always have is, was your orientation in English or was it in your host language, Abby?
Mine was in English.
Yours was in English. Maddie?
It was in Czech, but then they translated into English after.
Okay, so it's not like either of you didn't know what the local rules were once you got started.
No, it was pretty clear.
Perfect. Great. Okay, so again, the no drinking rule varies a lot from place to place. As the girls explained, sometimes it's okay for you to be able to have a drink with your host family. Sometimes it's okay for you to have a drink with your host Rotary Club. But in all cases, I would strongly recommend that you take the position that the default rule is that there's no drinking at all. Certainly, it is never acceptable to go out drinking with your friends from school or other exchange students. And certainly never acceptable to show up back at your host family drunk or impaired, which we'll talk about in a minute. So if you're trying certainly not to get sent home from exchange, make sure that you understand what the rules are in your host district, but the default being there's no drinking at all. So if you want to be absolutely on the safe side, make sure that you're not drinking at all, or make sure that you understand the local rules. The next of the 4 Ds is no drugs. Actually, I want to back up just a second for the no drinking rule. In most of the cases, in most places that our exchange students are going to, the legal age for drinking is probably at least 18. Abby, is there a legal age for drinking in Italy?
I think the legal age is 18, but nobody really respects that. You can buy beer from a vending machine on the street. So.
Okay, Maddie?
Yeah, same in the Czech Republic. The legal age is 18, but it's pretty relaxed.
Okay, so in most cases, the legal age for drinking in most of the places that we'll be sending students is 18 years old. So if you're one of the exchange students that will not be 18 while you're away on exchange, the first and foremost thing that you have to remember is you're probably breaking the law if you're in possession or consuming alcohol. And that has its own repercussions that we'll talk about a little bit later on. The same applies for the next rule, which is no drugs. In most of the cases, in most places that we send students to, the possession of narcotics is illegal. Abby, what are rules like? What are laws like in Italy?
I don't really know. I couldn't tell you. I don't know anyone there that did drugs, or although I can tell you that on the bus on my way to school every morning, I did smell a lot of weed. So
that was helpful. Thank you. Maddie. Maddie, do you know what the rules are in the Czech Republic?
Yeah, so marijuana is illegal in the Czech Republic as well.
Okay, as I say, I believe the vast majority of places that we send students to, the possession or use of narcotics or drugs is completely illegal. The possible exception may be in the Netherlands, where I believe it is still technically illegal, though it is somewhat accepted. But I wouldn't rely on the difference between being accepted and being legal as a defense should you get in any kind of trouble. So again, the no drugs rule for Rotary Exchange students is designed primarily to keep you safe. The idea being that if you're someplace that you're not really familiar with the culture, you're not really familiar with the language, and you're not really familiar with the lay of the land, being impaired just adds that extra layer of vulnerability to you and makes it so that you may not completely understand what's going on and may find yourself in a situation that could be dangerous. Ladies, have you got anything that you'd like to add on the drug side?
Yeah, I feel like most people just kind of realize that drugs are not a good situation probably to do in Canada, especially since almost all of you will be under 18. And it's certainly not a good situation to do when you're constantly making first impressions and you're always representing your country.
Okay. All right. The third no D is no driving. And certainly here in District 5360, we make sure that that includes no motorcycles, golf carts, boats, anything that's motorized. We say you probably shouldn't be driving. I've done a fair bit of looking into this rule, and I believe that the primary reason for this rule is insurance related, in that when exchange students go on exchange, they're required to have exchange that is both covering medical issues and a liability on their side. And the insurance varies, so there are different insurance policies that you may be able to get, some of them from your host country or some of them from here. And I'm not sure that driving an automobile is covered by any or all of those various insurance policies. So I think a lot of this rule has to do with insurance, but a lot of it also has to do with age restrictions and things. So Abby, at what age can kids in Italy get their driver's license?
they can get their, like, what would be equivalent to our learner's license when they turn 18.
Okay.
And they have to do, like, mandatory driver's ed type stuff.
Okay, so they wouldn't get their actual driver's license until sometime after they were 18.
Yeah.
Okay, Maddie.
Yeah, in the Czech Republic, it's also that they can get their license, but it's like a kind of like a GDL license at 18.
Okay, so for most of our exchange students who are going away on exchange, they're going to be under 18 at the time they arrive. So you wouldn't qualify to have a license. That doesn't mean that your Alberta license wouldn't qualify you to drive, but there's is, I guess, some gray area as to whether or not you'd be legally able to drive with either your Alberta learner's license or an Alberta permit if you were under 18 years old. I know that there is an international driver's license that people can obtain. So if you went down to your local AMA, they'd be happy to give you the test for an international driver's license, but I believe the age to get an international driver's license is 25. So in most cases, I don't think you'd be able to get an international driver's license. So again, the combination of rules, number one, in most cases, I don't think you'd be of age to drive in the country that you're going to, and I'm not sure if your license your Alberta license would be valid where you're driving. And second of all, there may be some insurance issues around driving anything with a motorized vehicle. So any of the boats, motorcycles, golf carts, anything like that, we just recommend that you not drive any of those things while you're away on exchange. Let's move on to the fourth of the no Ds. This is no dating. And the rule around this basically says that there should be no serious dating that might limit your experience with others. This is a rather difficult one, especially in these days when what young people are considering dating necessarily isn't what people of my generation would be considered dating. So we have a few different issues with that. But the basic idea, I believe, of the Rotary no-D dating is that you are going on exchange to learn a lot about the culture that you're going to. And if you happen to get yourself involved in a situation where you're spending a lot of your time with a certain person, that means you're limiting your availability to be with others and to learn culture. I say a lot in our host family discussion that generally speaking, exchange students have 3 or 4 host families because the cultural experience in one host family may be significantly different than the cultural experience in another host family. So likewise, being attached to a single person while you're on exchange may limit your cultural experience to others while you're on exchange. Now, I have heard many situations where students become romantically involved with others while on exchange. Maddie, did that happen anywhere in your district while you were away?
Yes. So like I said, we have a lot of exchange students. So there's a lot of different situations. I knew a lot of people who stayed together for almost the whole year of exchange, and then they had to break up because just distance is too hard. And that's pretty sad when you're with someone for a whole year and you basically invest a year into their lives, and then you just break up and you realize that you had a lot of other people you could have talked to during exchange.
Right. Abby?
My district was only 6 people, so we were all girls, and none of us romantic relationships of any kind while we were there.
Okay, and the other thing that we always bring up in the no dating section of our rules is that anything that leads to a sexual relationship where there might be unborn children involved adds an extra layer of complication to your exchange for sure. So we don't want what are called Rotary babies involved in any of our exchange with any of our exchange students. It makes life exceptionally difficult a little later on. So those are the 4 Ds that we generally talk about when we're discussing Rotary exchange. So no drinking, no drugs, no driving, and no dating. In the last few years, we've actually had a couple of other Ds added. So while you may learn about the 4 Ds if you Google Rotary exchange, there are a couple of them been added recently. One of them being no downloading. And we've added this one for the digital age, where most of our students are probably going to be taking laptops, and if not laptops, certainly phones with them when they go on exchange. So the no D related to those is no downloading, and that means pirated music or movies and no pornographic material. The reason for this rule is primarily legally based in that downloading music or videos certainly can be illegal, and pornographic material is also illegal in most places. So if you were to be caught downloading any of these materials, you could end up in legal trouble. And we're going to talk about a little bit about what happens with legal trouble here a little later on. Girls, this probably wasn't a big deal for any of you, but any experience with either of those?
I never had any personal experience, but I did hear of someone who was pirating a movie or something like that, and his host family actually had to pay a huge fine for him. So that's kind of sucky. I don't think your host family really wants you around after that.
Right. So, I mean, the other problem, of course, is that you just don't know what the local rules and regulations are. So you can get caught up in something that you hadn't intended to get caught up in if you're doing any of those kinds of things. Abby?
I didn't have any experiences with this.
Okay.
It's one of the ones that's kind of less thought of, I guess.
Right.
I never download movies or music or anything like that here, so I never did it there.
Okay, so certainly the other issue is, especially if you're doing it either Wi-Fi or phone-based, is that you may not necessarily understand what the costs are involved in downloading things. in North America, we have both internet plans that we use basically at home and phone plans that we have on our cells, but you may not understand what it costs for downloading things wherever you happen to be. So here in Canada, for example, there are lots of times overage charges. So if you're downloading something more than what your internet plan allows, you get charged an amount for that. And you certainly wouldn't want to stick one of your host families with a big bill for something, for things that you've downloaded because you didn't understand what the downloading charges were where you happen to be hosted. The second D that's been added to the 4Ds in recent years is no disfigurement. And the no disfigurement rule basically asks that you not get any tattoos or piercings while you're away on exchange. The primary reason for this, well, two primary reasons for this. Number one, the sanitary conditions for places where you might either have tattoos or piercings done in your host country may not be the same as what you would expect here at home. So there could be some health implications involved. And second, we certainly like to send students home from District 5360 in the same condition that they arrived in. So having been a host parent on numerous occasions, I know that I really don't want to have to phone an exchange student's mother and explain how the big tattoo of Canada ended up on their shoulder when they get home. Girls, any experience with these ones? Anything happen with either tattoos or piercings, Maddie?
No, actually, but my district extended it a little bit further that you couldn't dye your hair, but they didn't really expand on that. So I did dye my hair, and then when I came to the meeting, they were like, that is not allowed. So they weren't too mad though, because I just didn't know, and it wasn't like I dyed it anything wild. I just dyed it like a reddish brown. So they let it go.
You weren't flaming pink.
No, it wasn't pink.
Okay.
It was like an auburn. It looks nice, I think.
Okay, so again, this is one of these things that would come up at your orientation when you first arrived. So very important that you pay attention to that orientation and make sure you understand what the rules for your particular district are. Abby.
I don't think this was a rule in my district. I know one of my friends got an ear piercing, but no one I know got a tattoo or anything like that. And it was
okay.
Just no normal earlobe piercing, nothing crazy.
Okay. And again, all of these rules may be enforced slightly differently in various host districts around the world, but if you stick to the default position, you're never going to get in trouble. So again, the things you should know are that breaking any of these rules are probably going to at least lead to a conversation between the district chair in your host district and the district chair back here in 5360. If those two chairmen agree, then it will mean the termination of your exchange. And I can tell you from experience that if a chair of a district abroad were to contest our district chair here and say that you had broken one of the 6 Ds, there would be almost no discussion. The district chair here would immediately agree that your exchange should be terminated. So you don't want to end up in a situation where your district chair abroad is emailing or telephoning the district chair here in District 5360. We've talked a little bit about breaking the law in your host district, and especially as it involves either drinking or drugs. And what you really need to understand about those things is that should you break the law in your host country, get arrested and get charged, there's almost nothing that Rotary can do for you. What is most likely to happen is that your visa would be canceled. So once you get arrested and charged, they're likely to cancel your visa and you'll be deported, which means your exchange will end early. And then, of course, there are legal consequences after that. So depending on the severity of what you do, you could end up in jail in your host country, and then Rotary can do almost nothing for you. If that ends up being the case, your best course of action is to contact the consulate that serves the area that you're going to, because Rotary really can't do all that much for you. Girls, I'm hoping the answer to this is going to be no, but are you aware of any situations in your districts where people were arrested or broke the law?
I was never told of anyone being arrested.
Me
Abby?
neither.
Excellent. So that's what we like to hear. We like to get our exchange students back home in time and not 7 to 10 years later. So we talked a little bit about the orientation that you're going to go through when you first arrive in country, and that'll happen pretty soon after you arrive. Girls, was it within the first month or so after you got there? Maddie?
It was actually early October, so it was a bit, like 6 weeks maybe.
Okay. Abby?
Mine was just under a month after I got there.
Okay, so early on you should have that orientation, and apart from the 4 or 6 Ds, depending on how you look at it, they should go through all of those extra rules and interpretations of the rules to make sure that you stay within the rules of the district. The one other thing that I wanted to talk about tonight, or today, depending on when you're watching the video, is that in District 5360 we have a policy for repayment of fees that are paid on your behalf by the club. So there are some clubs within District 5360 that will pay for all or part of the Rotary Exchange fees. So the fees for 2020-2021 are set at $6,000. In addition to that, there's the $1,000 bond that you would be required to pay and the insurance amount that you would be required to pay. There are some clubs within the district that will pay all or part of that $6,000 for you. There are also a number of clubs who have a procedure whereby if you successfully complete your exchange, they'll reimburse you for some of the fees at that point in time, or they will give you a scholarship to go to secondary education following the successful completion of your exchange. That means not coming home early. So in a case where you've got a club that pays for all of your expenses for you, the District 5360 policy is that if you come home early, so that's either voluntarily, so you decide that you would like to come home, or if you get sent home, you need to reimburse the sponsor club whatever it is that they have paid for you. Abby, I know that the Okotoks Club does not pay for anything up front. Maddie, does the Medicine Hat Club pay for any of your expense in advance?
No, it's a $2,000 scholarship if you complete the exchange successfully.
Perfect. That is actually what the district likes to see. We like to see that all of the clubs paying for things on the back end rather than the front end, because we like to have all of our exchange students have their own money in the game. I have seen on a number of occasions where students who have had their entire amounts paid for them by the club decide that they would like to come home early, either because they want to graduate with their friends, or they need to see a boyfriend or girlfriend at home, or any of those reasons that we talked about in the Are You an Exchange Student presentation that might lead to an early return. So just know that in the case where your sponsor club is paying any amount for you of exchange before you go, that should you come home from exchange early, that amount would be repayable to the club. And that really ends our presentation on the rules, ladies, unless you have anything on the rules that you would like to add. Anything special from an Italian point of view, Abby?
I think we covered it all. Just make sure you pay attention to the orientation that they do there, because everything is going to be slightly different probably. So make sure you pay attention.
Okay, Maddie.
Yeah, just be smart, guys. Use your common judgment. You're going to have a great exchange.
All right. Thank you very much. So students, in the assignment that you have, there's now a multiple choice question assignment for you to complete and hand in. And other than that, at some point in time, we're going to have a contract for you to sign. So the contract will have to be signed by both you and your parents, saying that you agree to abide by the Rotary rules. If you're 18 or going to be over 18 while you're on exchange, we also have a second contract that says that you alone are going to be responsible, and that you'll be willing to abide by the rules while you're on exchange. So take a look into your Google Classroom and see when that assignment is due, and I'll look forward to marking them when they get in. So thanks very much, Maddie, for joining us here today.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
Abby, thank you for joining us.
No problem.
And that brings to an end our presentation for the rules. Again, if you ever have any questions or anything, please don't hesitate to send me an email, and we'll make sure that all of your issues are addressed. I look forward to seeing you all at January orientation on January 18th, and then seeing you again at March orientation a little later on. We'll talk to you then.